evening, Arlington. It's September. There's a crispness in the morning air. The leaves are turning. It's back to school month in Arlington County, or as many parents call it, the most wonderful time of the year. One of the reasons it's so wonderful for them is that they're sending their students to Arlington Public Schools, a school system that is nationally recognized for its excellence in a variety of venues and variety of publications and through various metrics. We've had Arlington teachers recognized throughout the state and throughout the region for their innovation and their excellence in the classroom. We have high-performing students. In many ways, this combines to make this a school system the envy not only of the region, but of many places nationally. Tonight, we're going to talk about all things related to the Arlington Public School System, its many successes, but also its challenges. With much success comes a spotlight on some of the areas where the school system needs to improve. We're going to get into all of those issues tonight here on VoiceBox, and we're privileged to have three people who know just a little bit about the Arlington Public Schools. We have Sally Baird, who is a member of the Arlington School Board and who is asking the voters in November to return her to a second term. We also have Mary Beth Chambers, who is the Assistant Superintendent for, let me hope I get this right, for Finance and Management Services, who certainly has a huge job managing the vast budget and financial structure of the Arlington school system. Welcome, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
And we also have the superintendent himself, Dr. Patrick Murphy, who is, I guess, now beginning his second full academic year.
That's correct. With
the Arlington Public Schools. Thank you all for joining us tonight on VoiceBox. We're going to have a great conversation amongst the four of us. You're also welcome to join in on the conversation by sending us an email, voicebox@arlingtonmedia.org. So let's really begin. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with Arlington Public Schools, so let's sort of focus the conversation. And Dr. Murphy, I'm going to lead with you to sort of outline the themes that are important to you from the vantage point of being superintendent for this academic year. What are your areas of focus?
First of all, Christian, thank you for having us here this evening. We enjoy these opportunities to engage with our community, and you do an excellent job. So I appreciate the opportunity. I know all three of us do very much in representing the school community.
Wonderful.
I think this year has been a part of looking at what's going on. I've got a year under my belt. The board is maturing with some of the focus that they have. So we've got a variety of challenges ahead of us, but I think one of the things that we've emphasized with our leadership is let's set some real key priorities. What are those key indicators that we're looking out there at as we look across the school year, and what are things that we want to look back and say, hey, we accomplished that. So I think the message has continued to be, let's focus on what we see as the priorities as we move through the coming year, and also looking toward the future. And I know Mary Beth will allude to a little bit of that when we talk about budget. But let me give you some specifics. I think the mathematics curriculum is really a key indicator for us as we look at students who move through a PK-12 experience, but then also move into post-secondary opportunities. And the research points to that very clearly. It says, as children move through a system, how successful they are in mathematics. So we're looking at how the program articulates. One of the gateways is Algebra 1 and at the 8th grade. So you don't just magically have kids arriving at 8th grade and they're in Algebra 1. We need to look back and say, okay, how do we start their career? How do they start out in elementary school? That goes with professional development. That makes sure your curriculum is linked. That makes sure that parents are informed and know about the opportunities, because it's a building block process with that. Early childhood, another key component. That's been a real strong asset here in Arlington. It's been a particular focus. We have one of the systems in place that is the pride of the Commonwealth, as also the nation. So we're continuing to build that, not only with Virginia Preschool Initiative, but Montessori and special education opportunities. So that's another key link as you look across our academic program. We're nationally recognized, as you pointed out, with students taking higher achieving classes, much more rigorous, with the advanced placement and the International Baccalaureate. We just got SAT scores back here the first part of this week. We showed double-digit improvement in all of the areas. But I think one of the things that, while I share some of these accolades or successes, is we know we've got some work to do. We know we've got some priorities to set. We're making sure that every child is achieving to their potential, being successful, and we have to look at that individually and also look at the whole child. We all have talents and abilities and things that we want to accentuate. So how do we tap into that for each of our children? The last thing I'll say is, how do we communicate this? In other words, how do we get parents involved? It's a knowledge. If I have the knowledge, then I can make better decisions. And I think that's one of the emphasis that we've really pushed out and we're going to continue to push out. But we want people to ask questions. We want them to be engaged. We want them to challenge us. I tell people every day, challenge me, because that'll make me better. It'll improve the opportunities for kids. It'll improve the access. And I think you're going to continue to hear that theme as we move through the year. The final piece, and I know Sally may allude to this, but teacher quality. It's one of the school board's priorities, but I dovetail that with the fact that we had one of our very own. There are 8 regions in the state, and the other day Colette Fraley, a teacher from Wakefield High School, was nominated or received the Region 4. We represent the Region 4 area as the representative as Teacher of the Year. So Colette's going to be going down with a few of us on October the 15th, and we're crossing our fingers that she is in fact the Virginia State Teacher of the Year.
Well, indeed. We certainly hope as a community that that is the case. You know, Dr. Murphy, a lot of the things that you mentioned, I'm sure people in the community agree wholeheartedly, but you know, when you talk about enhancing the mathematics curriculum and expanding, if you will, maybe opportunities for pre-K and Montessori, those are all things that have costs attached to them. And we live in a community with abundant but not unlimited resources. And the way we sort of fund education is maybe not typical for what people may be used to if they come from other parts of the country. Mary Beth, can you give us just a primer sort of on how that works and you know, what that does to the school system in terms of long-term planning, how funding is allocated for children's education?
Well, in Arlington, actually, we're really fortunate to have a revenue sharing agreement with the county, and about 82% of the revenue to the schools comes from the county. And it's primarily through a percentage of locally generated tax revenue. The bulk of that is the real estate taxes. So as the real estate figures were going higher, the school benefited, as did the county. And now we all know what's happening, so we're really looking at how we can really protect the classroom and, you know, kind of maintain the services that we're able to maintain. And it was a difficult year last year, looking at how we did make some cuts, a number of cuts, but really tried to preserve the instruction that's going on in the classroom. The pre-K program, we receive a lot of funding from the state for that, and we were able to add 1 pre-K class this year without any of local funding. It was all from the state funds. We also actually partnered with a community program to at Buckingham to allow them to have 2 pre-K programs, and we will provide support for them. This is not staffing or funding, but just really, you know, overall support and curriculum guidance and things like that. So we do look for different areas. We do have some, you know, additional IDEA and Title I money this year, but that will be going away next year. So that's going to be a challenge for us in next year's budget as well. But again, with the bulk of our money coming from the county and the revenue sharing agreement, we are very fortunate in Arlington. So
in many ways, the relative soft recession here in Arlington translated, you know, directly to the schools and making it, well, a relatively, you know, soft adjustment to budget figures compared to, I guess, what a lot of communities deal with.
That's true.
Most people elsewhere hear about, you know, education cuts resulting in teacher layoffs and other, you know, drastic approaches to providing education. We haven't had to do that here in Arlington?
We have not. What we did do last year as one of our reductions was to increase class size. And that generated some savings for us. Our class sizes started out pretty low, and even increasing it by 1 at some of the grade levels, it's still pretty low compared to other jurisdictions. What's really a challenge for us is our increasing enrollment. It's, you know, even over projections, we continue to see the classes growing, and we continue all through the summer. We've been adding more teachers to accommodate those classes. So even though we increase class size, we still have a recommended max, and if a kindergarten goes over a certain number, we will put another teacher there. So we've been adding a number of teachers, assistants to our classes over the summer to make sure that the schools are ready for opening a school. And you'll see throughout the county also relocatables, relocatable classrooms to accommodate the increased growth in enrollment.
Well, we will talk about demographics and capacity utilization a little bit later on. Remember, you can join in on this conversation by sending in an email for a question that we'll ask at an appropriate moment in the show, voicebox@arlingtonmedia.org. And now let me turn to Sally Baird, who's completing your 4th year on the school board. And I guess you started during a very different economic climate.
Indeed.
You've seen a lot in these last 4 years, Sally.
Only 4 years, yes, yes. I have commented that even in terms of our enrollment numbers, when I was first ran for office in 2006, our enrollment was declining. So the fact that we are here only 4 years later, and we have a very different challenge in front of us. As we look ahead as a school board to the year, there's several sort of big picture items that are going to drive our discussion. Certainly, as the superintendent and Ms. Chambers referred to, the budget is going to continue to be at the front. And I think we approached that differently last year, I think, with the amount of community involvement and very early in that dialogue. And I think that is absolutely what we're going to do again this year. So I think as we go into the fall, there's going to be a number of budget forums so that we can work it through as a community and sort of see where we land. You mentioned that it wasn't quite as hard of a landing as other communities, but I think part of that is because we did work really closely with the community. And I don't think that when we were ultimately sort of received the budget that there were any surprises. That everybody, we saw it coming, we understood, we took measured steps. The other thing that's big on our horizon is the development of the next strategic plan that will take us out for the next 6-year horizon. So that is another community effort. There is a group that is convening now that's going to begin that process, and that's going to begin a series of dialogues. And it's an opportunity, I think, for the community to take the strategic plan and the objectives that we put into place and really define how we're going to move into the future years and how we're going to frame our discussion around issues of achievement. I think one of the important things that we are bringing to that this time is actually focusing not only on achievement and all the indicators in terms of achievement, but actually looking at ourselves as a business operation and actually putting the same sort of measurement tools on our business operations. And
can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What that might look like for people who get to see some different metrics attached to schools?
Well, and the superintendent might be able to speak more specifically because I know he's working very closely with staff on this. But you know, we do evaluate our instructional programs every 6 years, and they go through a very rigorous evaluation process, bringing in outside evaluators, having to compile data, and really looking to make sure that the instructional programs we've put together are actually delivering what they're supposed to do across the system and in a uniform kind of way. And we have never applied that same level of evaluation to our business units, transportation, information services. And because how efficient we run our business operations absolutely translates in what we can deliver to students. So we want to bring the same sort of evaluative process and just perspective to how we run the business parts of our operation.
Thank you for that. Okay. Well, let's look at this strategic plan. Excuse me. I guess this is the last year of the current strategic plan, so apt time to begin that process. And there were a number of key goals that a lot of members of the community were interested in, not only achievement overall, but closing achievement gaps among various populations. How'd you do? Grade yourself. How has Arlington fared with sort of implementing and achieving the last strategic plan?
Well, on a lot of measures, when you actually look at our results year over year, we've made steady progress and we've narrowed the gap in all categories. I think the challenge that we face as a school system is in the last couple of years in a number of key categories, we've plateaued. And I think that's made all of us, school board, staff, administration, really step back and say, you know, what does this mean, and how do we really need to look at what we're doing? And I think as we go into the next strategic planning process, I think the core tenets of our present strategic plan in spirit pretty much will frame the next one. I think how we position those and embrace them as a community, I think and how we articulate them is probably where there's going to become more of a nuance. I know one of the challenges that I think we all have had is that the present strategic plan has so many different indicators. It's sort of a behemoth to try to keep track of all, and I think that we want to zero in. The superintendent had mentioned Algebra 1 as being a gateway, and to really sort of target that. One of the things you had mentioned pre-K is looking, you know, we're talking about Algebra 1 in 8th grade, but really back that up and start talking about that, you know, in kindergarten, and talk to kids as they're learning math and begin to talk about algebra. Well, when you're in 7th or 8th grade and you're taking Algebra 1, and just really begin to build those fundamentals and make sure that every student, as they move through elementary school, is where they need to be, and then when they go into middle school, that then we pick them up there and we get them to that destination. And I think it's looking at those sort of the individual pieces of that I think will really sort of lie at the core of our next strategic plan.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about you know, people who don't have children in schools, but who are nonetheless stakeholders because they're Arlington residents, and for many of them, the most visible thing that APS does or has done in the relative recent past is to build things. They see these big things in their community, these renovated schools, and you know, I hear from lots of people, and you know, many people just gush and love you know, the architectural splendor and modernness of the buildings. Other people sort of blanch at what they perceive to be exorbitant cost for these facilities. Let's put into perspective, how have we done given the amount of construction that we've done over the last, you know, 15, 20 years? Is it something that we're getting really good at, delivering buildings in a timely, cost-effective manner? Is there still a lot of work to be done, or are the circumstances just so different it's tough to really gauge? Actually,
we build buildings pretty well.
Yeah. You've gotten good at construction?
Yeah. Because we're really have a time constraint. We have to make sure the buildings are open when the students show up. So we have a really good system down for how we manage our buildings, and finance actually works very closely with facilities and operations in managing the funds. You know, even I have a staff person who goes to the meetings out on site, you know, and just talking about change orders and, you know, holding the line and no, we can't do this, we have to look at other ways. So we've really been focusing very hard. I mean, actually through the direction of Dr. Murphy, we were doing it before, but, you know, as we were, he came in and he was asking a lot of questions, and we kind of built this matrix. Built this matrix of, you know, just making sure things are in control, and we're not going over budget. And so we've been doing pretty well. And certainly just the budget climate with construction has helped us.
Yes.
You know, we built Washington Lee. We're finalizing that, and that's about a $100 million project, which sounds like a lot, and it does serve the students primarily, but it also serves the community. That building is used extensively, and for people who have used the pools, you know, we get a lot of good feedback on the pools at Washington Lee. Yorktown, actually, we really benefited from a good construction market. The building that's going up, the budget is about $84 million. And we're really doing well staying on budget with that project. And then Wakefield, that's on the bond referendum for this fall. You know, hopefully if we're successful, we'll start building next July. And that actually is a $115 million project. But because we did so well at Yorktown, we had $20 million of bonding authority that was approved in 2008 that we're putting towards Wakefield. So we only need to ask the voters this time for about $84 million. And that will be, Yorktown's a longer project because it's a constrained site, and it's like 6 phases in it. But Wakefield, once it starts, if we're successful in the fall, it will start in July. of 2011, and the students will be entering a new building in the fall of 2013.
Oh, I thought it was 14. Then 30. Okay.
I think
So like a 2-year construction?
2014 is when they
Yeah.
start demolishing the old building, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sally, you want to say
And
something?
yeah, in terms of, I want to put our current building sort of in a more of a historical perspective, and that is in terms of our capital development process. I think there were a number of years, several decades ago, where the capital projects sort of languished and didn't happen. So we were faced with a situation, in fact, it was before I came on the board, where there were a number of buildings that were in pretty bad shape, and we needed to move through them. So we're at the end of that, and Wakefield really does bring us to the end. And I think then what we're going to do is go back, and I would actually cite, I don't know if you've happened to see the renovations at Thomas Jefferson.
I have, yes.
Yes, and that I think is an example of I think strategic use of funds, in that there was a time 3 years ago, and I was involved in that conversation with the board, that there was talk that the Jefferson facility needed to be entirely rebuilt. We looked at the budget horizon though, and saw, with given the different projects, that was not going to happen. So instead we took a step back and said, what does this facility need? And I believe that the funds expended there are in the neighborhood of $10 million.
It is around $10 million.
And we've renovated that to the point where we're going to get several more decades of use out of it. So I think as we go into the next cycle, that we're going to see more projects where it's more deliberate and it's not wholesale. But again, we're making up for time past and getting some buildings to where they needed to be.
Well, tied into this issue, I look at the example of Washington Lee. You've got a school, it cost $100 million, and already it's at capacity in terms of students. And I'm just wondering, what lessons do we draw from that? And believe me, I'm not critical of you all on this issue, because people go broke trying to project demographics, particularly in a community like Arlington that's so transient. But is there anything that we sort of learned from that experience, having a newly minted building that's kind of filled to the brim right off the bat?
When you build it, they will come. That's why I think we have found that actually at every level, even some of our elementary schools that were renovated when you open new buildings. And I think it's happened at the same time that there's been just demographic shifts. People are staying in Arlington who 5 or 10 more years ago were moving further out. So I think there was sort of a confluence of events. In terms of our capacity, one of the things, and maybe the superintendent can speak to this, that we are looking, talking about strategic planning, as we look about how we manage our facilities and our capacity, one of the things is how we use the high school buildings in particular, and Washington Lee is an example this year of extending the school day. And I believe this year we started offering classes as early as 7 a.m. And the goal is, with all of our high schools over the next few years, that we will stretch out the school day so it's more responsive to what kids need, but it also stretches out use of the facilities over a greater period of time. So it's achieving multiple objectives. And I think the situation with Washington Lee, compounded by our capacity problems system-wide, have thinking creatively.
Because according to estimates that I've seen on the APS website, by 2015, we're looking at most schools being at least 90% capacity, just a handful, less than a handful under that, and I believe a couple I saw as high as 140% capacity. What are we going to do? A lot of relocatables, Mary Beth? Or?
Well, I think that's part of the discussion that has been going on in Arlington County now for some time. I know there were several discussions about capacity for many years, and there's one prime example that had they exercised boundary changes several years ago and moved the boundaries, the consequence would have been we would have been right back where we are. So I think a different approach, and the starting part of that different approach was we brought someone in from the outside and who does this professionally, and had them look at the situation. They're a national firm, and they gave us some direction. They gave us some help. I also think we worked with our facility advisory committee, and so again, engaging constituents in problem solving. And as a result of all that work, last December, the board adopted a strategy or a planning model to look at a time horizon for 5 years. And so there's a variety of strategies, from using relocatables to flexible scheduling to perhaps changing the way that we use some of our buildings. The example of that is a pre-K center and pulling some of the pre-Ks out to some of the existing facilities. We, further out, we are going to possibly have to look at some construction solutions, but I think it was also a commitment that we made with the planning of our building cycles that we needed to move forward at this time. So we're engaged in it. We're monitoring it very closely. We've made adjustments and we'll continue to have to make adjustments and look at things non-traditional. I think the use of the building as not a 8 to 2 or a 9 to 3 type of facility has got to be part of that plan, and how we think about space is also going to be part of that plan. I think there's another aspect to this, having experiences in a variety of different school divisions as well. A school building built for 1,800 students is a much different building than a building that's built for 3,000 students. So even though the building may be slightly over capacity or at capacity, a building for 3,000 students has a completely different lifestyle to it. And if it's sitting empty, taxpayers become very aware and it's very evident that those tax dollars are sitting there in vacant buildings.
Indeed.
One of the things that I would pick up on what the superintendent has said, that I always think it's really important to bring in this conversation, is to look at the patterns of growth. And there's historical trends that we follow. And in fact, some of the neighborhoods where we're having a big growth in students are the same neighborhoods that 40 years ago had the same growth. And then they went down again. So as we look at it system-wide and really do look out on the horizon and plan for the long term, we have short-term plans which do include the strategic use of relocatables. Some neighborhoods have a finite amount of space where people can go. And chances are, once we get through some amount of time, there will be a plateau, and it will start just like it did 40 years ago. There's other places in the county where there's room for new growth and expected, and Crystal City would be one. And I know, a lot of what drove our discussion about boundary changes 3 years ago was some of the crowding near like East Falls Church, Tuckahoe, and Nottingham, which definitely have crowding issues, but they're in a part of the county, again, 40 years ago, at some point there has to be a plateau because there's not a lot of new property for new houses to go up. But you look at some place like Crystal City where there's a 30-year plan to put in a lot of single-family housing and multifamily units. So that, as we look at the big picture, we need to take into account sort of the whole of where people live in Arlington and realize that just because there's growth in one place right now, it may not continue at that same pace forever. And like Dr. Murphy said, an empty building is even more painful to look at than a relocatable.
Let me ask you how this works, because, for parents who have children at Tuckahoe or any of the other schools that are at or near capacity, all they tend to care about, not to generalize completely, but the experience for their child or their children, and they don't have the benefit of taking the long view perspective.
Yes,
how do you communicate sort of, this very reasoned approach to parents who have that very specific, but what about my child concern?
A couple fronts. I think one of the things we found during the boundary process, people love their schools. And in fact, what we found was when we were considering some boundary shifts is we had parents say, we'd rather be in a relocatable than have to go to a different school. Not that the other school's not a great choice. We really like this, and this is where we want to go. And so I think that's been important, is that I think people are very committed to their schools. And I think also, Dr. Murphy mentioned our Facilities Advisory Council. We have been working very closely with our citizen committee that advises us. In fact, we've created a subcommittee off that group that is the Planning, Projections and Capacity Committee that works really closely with our facilities staff. And I think that they have helped us work with the community in sort of building some of those understandings. And we've made sure that we are including the community in the discussion. But it's definitely We need to hear it, though. We need to hear it.
I think that was one of the things in the fall when the consultant came in and we conducted a survey and we got feedback, as Ms. Baird alluded to. That was one of the strongest feedback points we got. We like our schools, make other adjustments. We do not want to entertain other solutions that we've considered in the past, and let's look for some types of alternatives. So a real strong sense of that, and we echoed that back to the constituents, and they said, yes, that's what you're hearing from us. So I think the knowledge, I also think the understanding, and I think the communication piece is a part of it, because as you said, it's my child today, and while the school system may have a solution, the reality is, how's it touching my shoreline?
So let's move into talking about a hot button issue. One that I never would have imagined to be a hot button issue, but the planetarium, the giant orb on Quincy Street by Washington Lee and by the school system headquarters. Big debate that I guess all three of you really can touch on, because it's got a political element, an operations element, and a financial element to it. What's the situation here? Because I read a lot of blogs. Arlington is blessed with a lot of people who are civically engaged and follow this issue seemingly closely, but it's tough to get a real complete story here.
Yeah. Well, let me start, and I'll sort of share the perspective of where we are and how we've gotten here. I think it really stems from the budget process, which we had ongoing throughout last fall, and the feedback that we received from constituents, and then also the information that we passed along to them in the decision-making process. I'll be fair to the situation. The planetarium got swept up in a little bit of that, and there was, I have to admit, some breakdown in communication there. So I think we come to the table with that realization. But a strong constituent voice came forward and said, hey, number one, we value this. We realize how we feel it plays a part in our curriculum. We've had great experiences there, either as adults or children ourselves, and it's got some recognition with some of the heroes that we have here in Arlington, who were astronauts, or who were the namesake for the planetarium. So the board really engaged with the group, along with the support of staff, in saying, okay, what's reasonable for us to be able to move forward and then strike a balance. And so this constituent said, we believe we can go out and support raising some funds to continue to keep the planetarium open. So that's really what we're engaged on. We took another hard look, and I think this is a key element, is the way the planetarium currently exists. It's got a lot of equipment from the day it was built, and it's got a lot of the programming for students. So we worked with our curriculum folks as well. So a lot of the updates is changing the program there that aligns with the curriculum that we have in place today. So it will become a modern facility and deliver the type of programs that we feel are necessary for our students today. So a lot of passion. There's a group out there now that it's trying to generate some funds. We've got a timeline on where we need to be, and that timeline is really to say the board needs to begin to have budget deliberations shortly after the first of the year here. So we'd like to know where we are with the fundraising, as far as what that group has generated, what decisions we need to make, and then we also have a piece in that, not only the balance for some of the capital improvement parts, but also in addition the operational pieces to keep the planetarium open. By the way, the planetarium right now is on a part-time schedule. There was a feeling that if we kept the planetarium open, and this was echoed by that group, if we kept the planetarium open, a facility that's open and operating has got a different tone to it than one that's closed and non-operational.
So the school system piece aside, is it correct that the Friends of the Planetarium have sort of been charged and challenged with raising $400,000?
I think the conversation that ended up coming out of this, I think, has been an excellent conversation for the community, because certainly you said we didn't quite know it was going to be, but that's been good. And I think as we started to get in letters when that was actually proposed as part of the last budget process, there was a lot of feeling that this was a great community resource, and citing how this serves our community, and having some scientists or astronomers who were talking about wanting to do classes there and doing community. And I think the conversation that's come up has two pieces to it. And one of them is curriculum and instruction and how it meets our students' needs. And the other one is what it's going to be for our community. And I think the good thing about what happened is the community side was not happening. That conversation wasn't happening. And in fact, we've had many people say, I didn't even know we had a planetarium in Arlington, but we ought to keep it open. But it's good only because we've had this discussion have we started this dialogue flowing. And one of the models, as we were working with the group, the Friends of the Planetarium, that we were looking at is we have the outdoor lab that's in Fauquier County that's run by a nonprofit that we support by putting staff there, taking kids there every day on buses. That there's a model out there where the school system and a nonprofit can create a really good partnership that meets both instructional needs and community needs. And I think that the planetarium folks, and I've talked to some friends of the planetarium, have said that in fact this dialogue has actually created more energy around this community use. And I think that that's the dialogue we see playing out right now, and how it's going to end up. But I perhaps at the end of the day that we can end up with some piece of the planetarium that serves instructional needs and some piece that serves community needs, and it's how those two sort of coexist. And but I think if not for the fact that it was sort of put out there on the table, it would continue to sort of be an unknown, underused resource.
Let me ask about this, but at $400,000 I think the group has to raise overall. The question becomes, is there a slippery slope to this? Does this become a fear that whenever the school system has difficult budget choices to make, that the community is challenged to put up if they want to see the resource continued? Is that something that people should fear? What makes this different?
I think it was timing. That was part of one element of this. I think the other piece was there was a flood of reaction, feedback from the community with the strong advocacy. So then as that began to happen, I began with staff to meet with a smaller group of representatives from the Friends of the Planetarium. And then we began to really talk about, okay, what's palatable here? And the feedback we were receiving is there's strong advocacy. We believe we can do this. And it was all framed around, give us an opportunity. Don't make a decision, draw a line in the sand come adoption of the budget. Let's keep this alive and see where we can go with it. Now, fundraising is a tricky deal, and I've done it on a small scale, but I think you have to let the process mature as well. And while their fundraising efforts have evolved here over the last several months, you never know when a big donor is going to come along or someone's going to come along and say, hey, we really support this. So, I applaud them, and I think they really have a lot of energy behind this. But as I think Ms. Baird alluded to, I think it's given the community a greater awareness. And if there is a commitment, if we feel this is an important asset, as many folks have written me, and a part of the community that we want to continue to maintain, then I think we need to have that consideration. And we all need to share in that.
Well, what do you say to the person who says, I hear you saying that the planetarium can serve some very valuable curricular needs, that it's got a valuable place in the curriculum, and if that's the case, it's an asset, it's an operation that you've had on the books since the beginning. Why are we at this point where we can't pay for something that's valuable?
In its present form, it's not, and that's where and that's our instructional experts are in its present form. It's not, and that's sort of I think why it.
Yeah, and I think that's also coupled with, from my understanding, back in 2005, this whole topic was visited then, and there were some issues that needed to be addressed then as it relates to also the capital improvement program. So I think those decisions were put off, and subsequently we built then to the 2010 issue.
Gotcha. Now with that, if this group is unsuccessful, what happens? What if they get halfway there? Is that a different conversation? You don't really know what happens at that point?
Yeah. I think part of what we're seeing, and I'm going to keep going back to it because I do feel very passionately about it, is this dialogue and what wheels get put into motion. I think there are some pretty exciting wheels that look like they're beginning to turn, and you know, I think if we get to the point that we have the budget and it really looks like there's some momentum, then the conversation will go one way, and if it doesn't and things sort of stall and it doesn't say, you know, then maybe it's a different conversation. But I think also now it's important to keep the motivation for the wheels to turn, because I think that that's where the most opportunity comes. And I know that the Friends of the Planetarium have been approached by a number of outside groups that would like to play a part one way or the other in this. And I think, again, the fact that we're needing to have this dialogue is keeping all those folks motivated, and I think that's good, because that's going to shape what it ultimately is.
So, do you think that, you know, maybe this community schools partnership has any other you know, replication possibilities in other areas of school system management and administration? And I'm not thinking of anything in particular, but now that you've got a taste for you know, engaging the community and maybe working together to find solutions, are there other areas where you think, maybe this could be a useful exercise to pursue?
Well, I don't think this is new, and I'm new. I don't think this represents anything that's new or cutting edge here that's happened just with this. I mean, you look across the school division with all the different advisory committees that we have, both the superintendent, the school board, the different departments. We've been engaging with the community here for a number of years, and the engagement has resulted in good feedback and good recommendations. It's the pacing, though, of that information. A lot of groups advocate and they say, here are the 12 things that we want you to do. Well, what are the 3 most important that we can do and that we can achieve given the resources that we have and given the time? So I think the feedback here is tremendous. I think we want that engagement. It's managing expectations, as I always say, and what's reasonable, and then how can we make those things happen with the resources we have.
And I certainly didn't mean to imply that Arlington doesn't engage the community frequently. What I was more focused on was the whole idea of engaging the community and making the community a part of the implementation process. Usually it is just as you described, we want this, and this is a little different. We want this, and here's how you can help us get it.
The only thing that I can draw on, or that I think illustrates it, was what happened last fall with the budget. And a lot of folks came to the table when we had the forums, and they had a lot of preconceived notions about X or Y. And they said X and Y have, you know, millions of dollars attached to them. So we said, okay, let's look at that. But when we really began to look behind the specifics of summer school, of exemplary programs, of specifics of what the dollars were associated with that, and then where the impact was, it was a different scenario. So it was really making people knowledgeable and understanding. By the way, Christian, as we worked through this, I think we had consensus about where we wound up and what the priorities were. So I think it's a knowledge, understanding, and information piece, and making sure that people have a willingness to buy in. And that was consistent with the forums, and then we also did a survey. We surveyed community and staff about what they saw as their priorities. So to answer your question, though, the question is yes. I think we'll look for other opportunities, because I think it gets us to a solution that really is, again, we're customer service oriented. Why do I want to provide a service for something that you don't want, or I want to tell you that the service is going to look that way? You don't come to the table.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of models for how the community and the schools work together. And I was just, as you were talking, thinking, you know, our pools. There are pools. We sort of co-manage them with the county. We have a citizens advisory group that represents both pieces of that equation to sort of keep a lot of our space. I know W&L, Jefferson in terms of the theater space. So there's a lot of places where there's schools and community partnerships, and I think in different places they take different shapes. And I think it's, at the end of the day, to the benefit of everybody, and we want to keep those relationships open open so that we can continue to sort of meet maximum efficiency and desire of the community to use school resources, because they are community resources.
Let's go to along these lines, but back to construction and the renovation that we've undergone in Arlington. There's been a big focus on sustainability and green wherever possible, and I'm just curious, and maybe, Mary Beth, maybe you can help me out with this. How does the way we build or renovate buildings today help in terms of sustainability over time and operational costs and not having to revisit with major reconstruction in 30 years? Is the next generation going to look a little bit different in terms of what we'll have to do to our facilities based on decisions you're making now?
Absolutely.
We've had many conversations about that, and we continue to talk as we go forward with our capital improvement planning. The buildings that we build now, and we've won a number of awards for these buildings with Reed, Westover, and Washington Lee, and we're proud of the buildings, and they do. We do expect the operational costs to be lower per square footage. We see that in our own homes when we buy different dishwasher, refrigerator, but
it never seems to work in my home. The
actually,
bills still go up. I don't know.
It did work in mine. It did work in mine with the new air conditioner, but so we are looking at that, and we are actually looking at other energy efficiencies, and I know Dr. Murphy's been working with finance and facilities and operations and our purchasing department on what are the things that we need to look at, and it's not just what's in our buildings, but it's the people in our buildings and changing behaviors and things like that. So that's big. It's beyond the buildings, but that's something that is a priority of Dr. Murphy's and also in the
the school boards.
I don't want to.
Yes, I was going to say I think the school board.
Yeah,
is really,
it is the school board and the county.
And the county, yeah. Over the last couple of years, that really has been a priority for the school board, and I think getting to the place where to look at sustainability issues were not something extra or different or outside of the equation, that it just becomes a part of how we do business. And from whether it's sort of the macro level to, as you said, changing the behaviors of individual staff or students in schools, it sort of needs to cascade. And one point of reference that I would cite was when we were taking some action last year on some of the decisions about Wakefield. One of the questions was what was going to be the HVAC source. And we went through a dialogue where we actually worked with staff and the superintendent, came up with sort of a framework for decision making and really looking at all the numbers. If we go with something more traditional, albeit more efficient, because what they have today is more efficient, or looking at geothermal. And what we came out to on that was looking that pretty much the costs were the same over the lifetime. The geothermal was a little bit more, and it was, I think, more upfront costs. But in looking at it, the likelihood of being able to sustain, the costs that that you're going to incur because of geothermal over the lifetime were much lower than potentially the rise in prices on the traditional side. Sure. So the fact that we went through such a deliberative and analytical way of really thinking about this, that it wasn't just we're buying the cheapest system, we're actually thinking, we're looking at this over the 50, 60-year life of it. And that was a really good, I think it was a good discussion for us as a board. It was also a good discussion for the community, because we actually had a lot of community members weigh in, and we did come down on the side of geothermal. And also photovoltaic and what was
hot water.
Solar
hot water.
Solar hot water. Okay. So in a sort of macro level, but then, even I think in the sort of the smallest thing from a number of our schools have gardens and are composting, and it's just the way we think about what we do. A number of schools also have trash-free lunch day, and they've and another, you can also integrate efforts like that in science, because I know some trash-free lunch groups, then they measure and actually weigh. So then they figure out over the course of a year how many pounds of trash do I generate, and so that it becomes just part of the instruction and not something extra on the side. So.
Well, you know, we are by being in the nation's capital region, we're sort of thrust into many national debates, even if they don't apply to Arlington in particular. And we've got the Secretary of Education who lives here and touts the quality of Arlington schools as a key reason. Yet on the other side of the river, we've got Michelle Rhee, who's made teacher quality a specific focus of her tenure in Washington, and you know, sometimes quite controversially. How do we deal with the teacher quality debates that rage nationally? Do they have any particular focus here in Arlington, or do we have maybe different concerns or issues with teacher quality here?
You know, one of the things I didn't mention at the outset is, and I think Mary Beth referred to them, the school board, we adopted 4 key priorities that are taking us into the coming year, and we did that at our meeting last week. And one of those was about rising achievement and student success, strategic planning, communication, but the other one was teacher quality. Okay. And under each one of those, there's many different topics and focus areas. But on teacher quality in particular, the thing that we always talk about is the single thing that will make the most difference in the achievement of a child is the teacher who's in the classroom. And I talked earlier about test scores plateauing. As we look at what we need to do next, we realize that we need to make sure we're getting teachers the support, but also making sure in terms of professional development that we're getting teachers the opportunities to get what they need. And maybe Dr. Murphy can comment on some of the other.
I think the issue around teacher quality nationally, I'll just paint a broad picture, is going to be a different question depending on the community. And I think we've been very fortunate here based on who we are and the resources that we have, that we attract teachers that want to grow, that have earned higher degrees, that get certifications. So I think that's an expectation here, and continue to will be as it becomes a continuing competitive market. So we want to make sure that we not only attract folks, but then we continue to retain them. And I know the board has many initiatives along those lines that advance the the quality and the profession of teaching. So I think that's piece one. I think the other piece that we need to look at is not only this professional development or professional training, but also emphasizing relationships. And that's been a really big part of our cultural competence. We all know growing up, teachers are role models for us. Mm-hmm. Teachers are someone that we respect. I tell the staff, they're always watching. So you're an important role model in their life. But coupled with that, and I think this is also a national trend, is we have a diverse population here. Who's standing up in front of that classroom? We want to have diverse role models. And so that's become a priority for us. We've made some strides, we've made some improvements in continuing to build a diverse workforce, but we've got continued work to do. And I know a lot of school divisions across the nation address that. But once again, I think Arlington has staked out the territory, said it's a priority, and we're beginning to move in that direction. And I think a lot of that is due to the effort of our senior staff, but also our principals in our school in making that part of a priority. So it's just not one answer. Mm-hmm. It's an array or a continuum, and I think you have to build along that. At the end of the day, it's going to be that relationship, that one-to-one, that individual who makes a difference. All of us, I'm sure, can share a very similar story of a pivotal point in our educational career when that one individual made a difference and sent us on a trajectory that got us to where we are today. So we emphasize that, we survey for that, we ask students, we ask parents, and we ask teachers about that. So we monitor it, and I think that's the last piece of this, is the monitoring and the evaluation that we put in place, but in the sense of providing feedback. In other words, we need to provide constructive feedback so we get better. It's not a system that's going to be a reprimand or demanding on someone. Mm-hmm. How do we build people? And I think building people is really building on their strengths.
Let me ask you sort of a big picture question. Forgive me, by day I work at a think tank, so this is sort of the way my brain is trained to work. But to what extent have we been able to figure out whether or not the plateauing in test scores is a result of teacher ability or a lack of ability, or maybe other circumstances that may be affecting the child, diverse role models in the school,
you know, having before, after care opportunities, adequate nutrition, parents who read aloud in the home. I mean, you all know the stuff. So to what extent are we able to figure out what might be the reasons for it? Because one of the debates nationally is that the focus is always, well, the teachers must have screwed up if the test scores plateau or decline, and some of those other areas that research and many of us believe to be quite important don't usually get looked at.
Well, one of the things I know, we track very closely the results of our customer satisfaction survey, and in particular the student surveys. And one of the things is, you know, every student should have at least one adult in their school, if not more, that they can talk to about anything. And that number is not as high as we would like. Can you? I would say it's not a bad number, but it's not. There are kids in our school who answered no to that question. That's not okay.
Right.
You know, and it's looking at some of those things that are maybe a little softer. Then, you know, how do you grab that on a test score?
Right.
You don't. But we have kids reporting that there's no one that they could talk to about anything. I think we've also looked a lot, and I think data nationally shows it, but even our own data, at some of the transition points in between elementary and middle school. There's, you know, that's sort of a really key point. And if someone comes in and they don't kind of make that transition too well, once they kind of fall, it's hard to get it going in the right direction again. And really, and Dr. Murphy mentioned relationships. I mean, that's what that is, you know, and also into high school. So as we look at the plateau, it is getting a closer handle and really being attentive and coming up with ways that we can measure it and see it and follow kids through.
I'd like to just pick up a little bit on this, and it may go in a little bit of a different direction, but I actually had a conversation about this today with a group of superintendents from the region, and the three areas that kind of came up as a wellspring, but you've heard them before: leadership. That building leadership, that principal leadership as a former principal, that's going to be key. That individual is going to be a driver. That is going to be your community agent right there. And so I think building leadership is key, and it's something that we continue to emphasize and underline and work with our building leaders on. I think expectations, and we can believe a lot of things, and I always get the balance between what I believe and how I act. And for me, it's how you act. That tells me who you are at the end of the day. And then I think you touched on all of those, an array: pre-K, healthy meals, opportunities, more rigorous classes, post-secondary experiences. So it's really the coupling of those three, and you see that not only in the research, but you see that across school divisions that are successful. And then the last piece.
I'm going to actually have to end you there because
consistency.
Consistency. Okay. And they are consistently telling me that we are out of time, and unfortunately, we're going to have to end this episode of Voice Box. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, Superintendent Patrick Murphy, Mary Beth Chambers, and Sally Baird.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your service to Arlington's children. We appreciate your being here tonight, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. Good night.